Prior to his assassination on November 22nd, 1963, John F. Kennedy represented a hope and possibility for many Americans. Elected in 1960 as the youngest president in U.S. history, JFK symbolized a generational shift and a promise of renewal. His administration, known for its charm and youth, was often romanticized as Camelot, a modern American golden age. Kennedy's handling of the Cuban Missile Crisis, support for civil rights, and ambitious space program won him admiration both at home and abroad, allowing for the media to generally portray him in a positive light. At the same time, many Americans still trusted the federal government. Though Cold War tensions ran high, confidence in national institutions remained stable in the early 1960s. This made Kennedy's assassination not just a personal tragedy, but a national trauma that diminished the foundation of public faith and marked the beginning of a widespread American distrust of power. Due to Lee Harvey Oswald's death 2 days after his arrest, he cannot stand trial, leading to questions that cannot be answered by the public. While the Warren Commission concluded that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone, widespread public distrust was fueled not just by conspiracy theories, but also by government secrecy, contradictory information, and sensational media coverage. The assassination of JFK became the first in a convoluted series that made Americans deeply skeptical of their leaders, laying the groundwork for political disillusionment that would come to define the late 20th century.
A 2025 New York Post article based on the newly declassified CIA files revealed that the agency had been monitoring Lee Harvey Oswald for years. They intercepted troubling communications and tracked Oswald's behavior abroad, yet withheld this information from the Secret Service ahead of Kennedy's visit to Dallas. Furthermore, internal documents show that CIA officials actually misled investigators in their surveillance timeline. While this does not suggest a government plot, it reveals a pattern of strategic withholding of information when transparency was needed most. Moreover, the contradictions continued in 1979 when the House Select Committee on Assassinations re-examined the case and reached a different conclusion. Based on auditory evidence and witness testimony, the committee believes that Kennedy was, on the basis of the evidence available to it, that President John F. Kennedy was probably assassinated as a result of a conspiracy. But the committee was unable to identify the other gunman or the extent of the conspiracy, directly challenging the lone gunman theory endorsed by the Warren Commission. This divergence between two government official reports undermined institutional credibility. The average American citizen was left to wonder, if the government itself cannot agree on what happened, how could the public trust either version? These inconsistencies invited alternative theories, not just because people wanted something bigger to believe in, but because the official accounts were flawed, secretive, and changing.
Academic research supports the idea that the government's lack of transparency, rather than wild speculation, is what drove public doubt. A thesis from the University of Missouri St. Louis argues that classified documents, missing files, and contradictory timelines generated lasting confusion and suspicion. The author points out that by tightly controlling the release of information, the government created a void in which conspiracy theories could begin. The study concludes that it was not the public's failure to understand, but the government's failure to be honest that triggered mistrust. This mistrust quickly became mainstream as, according to a 2013 Gallup News poll, 61% of Americans believed that JFK was killed as part of a conspiracy. Over the years, media coverage played a significant role in shaping this perception, as films such as JFK by Oliver Stone, TV specials, and countless investigative articles kept the controversy alive. This use of TV and other films portraying this controversy further caused American belief of a conspiracy killing to swell over 81%, as films like JFK, which implied that President Lyndon Johnson may have been involved, gained public recognition and even won an Academy Award. Americans no longer knew what or who to believe. The assassination of President Kennedy was not an isolated event in the erosion of public trust, but rather a single, visible step in a disillusioning series. In the years that followed, the American public would observe a series of betrayals that would reinforce similar patterns of secrecy and deceit. The Vietnam War, for instance, escalated under false premises, and the release of the Pentagon Papers revealed that multiple administrations had intentionally misled the public about both the war's progress and purpose. In the same vein, President Nixon's abuse of power and cover-up efforts that made the Watergate scandal confirmed that even the highest office in the country was not above corruption. The 1968 assassination of popular civil rights activist Martin Luther King Jr., which to this day remains unanswered, only added to the climate of fear and government skepticism. Together, these events shattered the idea that American institutions could fully be trusted. The Kennedy assassination was the first observable breach in the social contract, which opened the door to an age of suspicion where official stories were met with doubt and leaders were not viewed as protectors but as potential deceivers.
All right, so what are our key takeaways here? President JFK's death was more than just the end of a presidency. It was the beginning of a national crisis. The federal government's inability to communicate transparently with its constituents, combined with contradictory investigations and sensationalized media, inspired American citizens' distrust in the federal government itself. Over time, this doubt spread, characterizing Americans' perspective on war, justice, and democracy. This observed uncertainty about Kennedy's assassination taught a generation that institutions could not always be trusted. That mistrust persisted across decades, later fueling broader concerns over centralized authority and expanding federal power. Concerns that shaped political rhetoric well into the 1980s, particularly during efforts to reduce government influence and restore public confidence. This interpretation underscores that what holds power over history and politics is not only what happened, but more so what people believe happened.